Welcome everyone on episode 2 of CX and Ops Roundtable. Thanks for joining us today. Most companies automating their customer operations right now are solving for speed and cost. What they're not solving for, and what's quietly becoming a serious problem, is compliance. You can layer AI on top of a broken process, but you don't fix the process, you just run it faster. And when something goes wrong in a regulated environment, that speed becomes a liability. That's the tension at the center of today's conversation. Why automation alone can't get you out of a compliance crisis, and what actually can. It's a topic we encounter regularly at Simply Contact, working on customer operations in regulated industries. So we wanted to bring in two people who deal with this on a daily basis. Daniel, Jerry, hi. Now over to you both.
Thank you, Rita. So, hi everybody. I'm Daniel Wardell. I lead the Alvaria CX Business Operations across EMEA. We specialize in compliant outbound for regulated industries.
Hey, Daniel. Thank you, Rita. And hello, everyone. I'm Jerry Angrave. I'm a customer experience consultant. I specialize in the aviation world and in the accessibility areas. I chair a number of airport and airline advisory forums as well. But I think, Rita, what you've raised is a really interesting question, an interesting challenge. Daniel, maybe kick us off. What should we be asking ourselves? What should we be focusing on in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. So, in my opinion, I think there's probably three key areas I think it's worth our discussion today. Number one being compliance needs to be designed in and not just audited afterwards. Um, I think organizations need to stop choosing between innovation and control. And finally, I think BPO should be valued for outcomes, not just cost. And I think from my perspective and the seat I sit in every day, I see numerous great examples of organization using compliance on the benefit of what outcomes that delivers. But I've seen plenty of bad examples of where compliance is an add-on, a bolt-on, and it's just something people need to do.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think it's a really interesting point, a number of points that we'll get into, and I think it sometimes can be a function of the organization, the way it's set up in its different silos, where you may have a compliance team, a legal team, an operations team, and those conversations, that collaboration has to be really effective to draw out this kind of outcomes that you were talking about. And then from a customer experience perspective, while automation obviously creates a better experience at the right point, it also has to know when automation is not the right answer.
Yeah.
And as Rita mentioned in the introduction, yeah, you can speed things up, it can make it consistent, but the irony is sometimes that the most needy cases, if you like, are those on the edge, the kind of more vulnerable customers, the more atypical experiences that automation doesn't tick the compliance box as well. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting story. So you mentioned about how do you build in compliance into that framework? What I guess you're seeing inside a lot of organizations, how are they going about it? What are the kind of best practices there?
Yeah, it's a great point actually, and I use this phrase quite a lot in my organisation. I think I've become quite renowned for my sort of snippy remarks that or catchphrases. And one I think I say quite a lot, not just internally, but when I'm speaking to prospects or even customers. Bad processes plus AI don't create a better process. They just create a faster bad process. Um, and I think that's where I probably start in terms of what I see as best practice. Best practice that we see in the market are organizations that really dig deep into their end-to-end customer journey and actually look at what they do well, what they could do better. And then they look at the individual use case of the type of customers, or in some cases, patients that they deal with. And I think when emotion is required, organizations tend to lead, or the best ones tend to still lead with that human touch. Where emotion isn't required, and things start to just the process itself, or the back end process, or the actual interaction can be automated. Um, Organizations that are really specific around them use cases tend to deliver great outcomes when they don't try and automate things that require any form of human emotion. I think when compliance comes into this, what we see works really well are organizations that look at the regulations, look at the reasons for compliance, and they try and shape that into that actually delivers a better outcome for the customer. That compliance, not regulation, in this instance, protects the client. So let's look at our platforms and let's make sure that that compliance and regulation is embedded at the core, as opposed to organizations that try and manage that regulation and compliance sort of at the end. And I think an example of this would be, especially if you look at the outbound market in general today, whether you're an airline, whether you're a healthcare organization, or whether you're a bank, historically, when you wanted to reach somebody, it's been for two reasons. Number one, you want to collect some debt, or number two, you want to sell them something. And that in reality is where a lot of the regulation has come from, in terms of who you can call, when you can call them, or how you can contact them in general. That regulation has been the same for quite a long time, albeit there are new regulations coming out, like the EU AI Act, where that's more designed to try and add more broader set of regulations to it. But the reason you reach out to people nowadays isn't just to collect debt or to sell them something. It can be for a number of reasons, but mainly service. I know that you see this in the airline industry. There's a lot of prompts now in regards to when you booked a flight. There's a lot of outreach to you as a passenger before you even get on that flight. Like, you can now check in, you can now download your boarding pass and everything else. And the organizations that do that in a compliant way and know who to call or who to contact and when are the ones that land a better customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's some really interesting points there. And I think one of the key areas is where an organization, not just airlines or airports, but organizations see compliance as the basic expectations. So some of this will depend on the ambition of the organization, how good it wants to be, how committed to that it is. Some will say, okay, well, if we're complying, then we must be okay, because compliance is all about treating customers fairly, making sure they're protected from those kind of more less scrupulous organizations, so we say. But I think there's a risk sometimes that in the day-to-day delivery of the business, there's a kind of almost like not a misunderstanding, but organizations see the compliance benchmarks as that's all they need to do. And I think what people like Simply Contact can do is kind of show those organizations, well, how do you elevate it above that? We've got that kind of layer of compliance, which is almost like your license to be in the game. And then on top of that, you've got the minimum expectations that customers expect, as you say, when you're flying, or when you're downloading your boarding pass, or when you're at the gate, or when you're going through security, whatever it may be. There's a number of expectations that you'll have, and above and beyond that, then we start loading in well, how do we make this different from everybody else? What's the brand promising? So that by the time you get to that kind of almost differentiated offering, but certainly a experience that is aligned to the brand promise, that compliance piece is really well baked in, because it's at the very foot of that kind of, when you're designing those intentional experiences. And I think what goes along with that is then that shows you where you should be measuring. So again, Simply Contact will be able to, and those kind of outsourced contact centers will be able to show what are the most important things that customers are worried about, which is likely to be over and above the compliance thresholds.
Yeah.
So I would always say, lean on people like Simply Contact for those insights, for that context, because one of the things I see sometimes is that the compliance measurement is not always about the best experience. It's about hitting those thresholds. And for example, in the EU, when we have passengers asking for assistance at an airport or through the airline, there are regulations about how long that should take. That's how that process is measured and how success is judged, alongside customer satisfaction as well. It has to be said, but the primary metric is the speed or the length of time with which people can be met off an aircraft or presented with the service. Now, which is fine, absolutely is fine. But then what's not in there is how dignified was that service? How personal was that service? How relaxed was that service? How did it make you feel? All that kind of stuff. So we can tick the compliance boxes, but it's not a guarantee that that will also tick all of the experience boxes. So I think the automation narrative in that conversation has to be really careful that it's not only helping us be compliant, but it's also helping to deliver a better experience as a result. So it's an interesting one, because it comes back to your point about what's this organization all about? How are we going to deliver our experiences? Is it going to be compliance led, or is it going to be customer led or organization led? But I think that mixed in with all of that are some really interesting conversations about delivering on the brand promise, about what we should measure, and so on.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point you make there. And also, my organisation and my background and history is mainly in that contact centre world. But let's be obviously, customer experience touches numerous different areas outside of just the contact centre space, and outside technology. And one of the things that I've seen from my own experience is that you can automate tasks, you can't automate accountability. And just picking up on the example of having disability access or special assistance on an airline. Like, my mother-in-law isn't disabled, but as she's got older, she's matured, she struggles to walk long distances, and a lot of the airports nowadays are pretty long walks from terminal to terminal. And it was interesting, and I will obviously mention where we flew from and to, but we recently flew somewhere, of which one, when we got to that airport, the actual special assistance desk was like at least a good 10-minute walk away from where we parked, which from a customer experience point of view is not that helpful if you don't currently have a wheelchair. And if you're in special assistance, you've requested it for a reason. And then the second part of this was, as we got into special assistance, and my mother-in-law got put in a chair and wheeled off with my father-in-law, they got taken to like a holding room, like a goldfish bowl type of thing. And they were messaging us in the airport saying, can you get us a quick bite to eat and a drink and so on, because we've not passed through any sort of duty-free, we're not in the main part of the airport, and all we've got is a pretty out-of-date vending machine. And we're waiting here to be taken to the plane, so we're not going to pass anywhere to get anything to eat. Of which I use that as an example of, no doubt the regulation, the compliance plays a part in that route from A to B, but at no point in that process in that airport has the customer experience been taken into account. The regulation, the compliance is sort of winning. And I think that's where organizations get it really wrong, is when they don't find the right balance between using regulation and using the compliance to actually elevate your customer experience, but ensuring that customer experience is the fundamental heartbeat of what you're trying to do. Because that's that's an example, and a real life example. Would my in-laws fly from that same airport again? Absolutely not. Not unless something was to change. And it's interesting that it takes a lot to win people's trust, but you can lose trust in an instance. And don't get me wrong, nothing was done wrong to them. There's no harm or anything. But just on experience itself, when you're going on holiday, part of the holiday for some people is going to the airport and is having maybe an early pint of beer, or a nice bite to eat, or a bit of a browse around the shops, and maybe getting some deals at the duty-free shop. If you've got disability access, why should you be penalised from having the same benefit that any other passenger gets? And I just find that interesting, as you mentioned, the aviation side of it.
Yeah, no, there shouldn't be any difference. Everybody should have the same opportunity to enjoy the airport offerings or the airline flight in the same way. There's obviously, that's not always as easy as it's easier said than done, but that's what we should be aspiring to, and making sure that those kind of examples don't happen. And I wonder if, just hearing you speak then about, is it our understanding of automation that is only a technology solution? Because I'm thinking in situations like that, and even if I'm ringing in saying I've lost my bags or I've left my laptop on the plane, there's automation in terms of the processes or the policies that would okay, this is the ask, ding ding ding, this is the process we're going to follow, and there's almost like an automated process then. And I wonder if sometimes organizations unintentionally make it very hard for their teams, their agents, to break into that process cycle and say, hang on a minute, for this customer, it's not right. We need to just intervene here and pull it out of this automated chain. But again, as I said, it's easier said than done sometimes, isn't it?
It is, and it's another interesting point, and just probably coming on to more my experience with Simply Contact, but also the BPOs as well. I mean, if I use that example in the airport, and that example exists in other environments like contact centers, where you may have a bill to pay for a local retailer or an online retailer. You've paid your bill, and then a day later you get a phone call from the contact center saying you've got an outstanding bill, you need to pay it. Well, no, I actually paid it yesterday, because their top knowledge in their process, so they're not aligned. They've got a list somewhere of people they need to dial. There's no doubt manual intervention in that, which means that the automation isn't working because there's static information there that's not updated regular. And we see that a hell of a lot. And I think in them examples, my advice to organizations would be, if you're not a specialist in the regulation and you're not fully educated on the compliance required to do the things you want to do, a little bit like, I'm not a lawyer. If I need legal advice, I go to a solicitor. If I need an extension building, I go to somebody who specializes in building and conveyance and everything else. If you're running an organization that specializes in, I just use a prime example, you specialize in selling something or selling a product. Well, you're probably not a specialist in knowing who you can contact, when you can contact, and when that regulation changes region on region. So why not go to a BPO like Simply Contact that brings expertise, language capabilities, they know the regulatory process, they've got the scalability, and they know how to deliver better customer outcomes. And I'm not saying every single scenario out there always means you're going to rely on a third party to do it for you. But if you've got the knowledge of and the skill gaps, just like anything that's in your personal world, you'd go speak to somebody who's got that experience and that know-how. And I personally find it, maybe it's a contentious point, I just find it quite ignorant that people think they can know everything about everything and be a specialist in everything, yet the experience that the customer receives is at the end of that. And if you get it wrong, you're not just getting it wrong for your organization, that has a negative consequence on your end customer. And I think, I remember the old advert from TV, and it used to say, think bike, think biker. It was a really catchy thing, because there were so many motorists getting killed in the roads that when you went to a junction, that sort of trademark saying was sort of in your head. You'd have a quick extra look. I always think, when it comes to things like this, think process, think customer, because the person at the end of that process is always your end customer. And if that process is working for you as a business and not for the end customer, you need to start again.
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? That it's the whole experience is defined by what it's like for that customer to be on the receiving end of what you do. And I think it's why it's really important. We've got compliance, we've got automation. That's all about the kind of delivery of the experience. But I think what really helps frontline delivery teams, contact centers, is if there's absolute clarity about what that experience should look like and feel like, so that the agents on the front line know, actually, it's okay to take a few minutes extra talking this customer through. We've done all the baseline compliance stuff, but this customer needs a bit more of a helping hand, and they need to know that it's okay. They're not going to get into trouble from their line manager because their average handle time is higher than everybody else. Yeah, it's that those kind of guardrails have got to be in place. That, yes, of course, secures the compliance bit, automates as much as possible, and that frees up the the team to do take the load of where there's those kind of edge cases or more complicated cases. But they also have to be, as I say, in a safe space that they can spend time sorting that problem out. So it goes back to that: how are you going to measure the effectiveness of the agent, of the contact center? But equally, you want your contact center, like Simply Contact, to come in and absolutely share the same values that you do and understand what that intentional experience is that you will want to deliver. So it's all about kind of aligning all the dots. And then if that happens collaboratively, then the compliance piece happens, the automation piece happens, the individual personalization piece can happen as well. And cost efficiencies, the cost of failure demand goes right down. So you can free up those resources to handle other cases. So I think it's a really interesting concept about the compliance automation delivery as you said.
It is, and it's also interesting from my perspective, where I see a sort of a broad range. Organizations today, or businesses, companies, whichever term you want to use, I think in some respects are scared to proactively reach out to their customers. One of the terms that's been used a lot in contact centers and strategies is deflection. Like, let's try and find a way that the customer can't call in. There's plenty of organizations out there that don't even publish a phone number, yet provide a service. And I always find that quite bonkers. But the reason they're trying to deflect them calling in is they want to promote self-serve. But some things you just can't self-serve. Some things just don't get that right. And in the world that we're going to of agentic agents, then maybe that is leapfrogged and that problem solved by the agentic workforce and not just the human workforce. But I think organizations are scared to call out because, one, they feel like you're imposing when you're calling somebody. Two, they don't really get the regulation or the compliant. Or three, they have to then underpin that process into their existing world. And I use again, I'm a fan of personal examples, but I bought something that's not unrecent, maybe a year ago. And it didn't work. And I won't mention what I bought or why it didn't work, but I bought something, got delivered, maybe had it an hour, went to utilize it and got it set up, didn't work. So I go on my email, try and find a contact number, which I went on the website, asked me to type in the issue I had. Didn't really get any help, found the phone number, called up, queued about an hour to get through to someone. Going through an IVR, which was easy to use. It was all automated. It recognized my voice. It understood my problem. I queued then to speak to the right department. And I'd rather wait an hour to speak to the right person than queue 3 minutes to speak to the wrong person. So the queue, the wait time didn't really bother me. But I get through to an agent, solves a problem within a couple of minutes. So in terms of contact center world, I got through to the right agent, right first time, and first time resolution. About an hour later, I get some emails contacting me. Can you rate your experience? And I think it wasn't 0 to 10. I think it was 1 to 10. I rated a 1. And I can't tell you exactly the timeline, but very quickly I get a phone call from a number I've not heard of before. I picks up, and it's the contact center manager from the organization I've just spoken to. Very polite, but very intrigued as to why I scored a 1. They'd listened to the call recording. They could see that my issue had been resolved. I seemed polite and pretty happy on the call. Why be scored as a 1? I says, because you asked me to rate the customer experience. You didn't ask me to rate your agent. You didn't ask me to rate the parts of the process. You asked me to rate the customer experience, and I rated a 1 because I did all the work. And he was a bit taken back by that comment. And what I said was, you've had no issues calling me. Like just now, you had no issues sending me an email after I call the contact center. So you have tools and you've got capabilities reaching out to me. My question would be is, when that product landed on my door, why didn't you reach out to me with a message then to say, did you receive your order? Have you opened it? And does it work? Had you have done that, you'd have found out it didn't, and you'd have reached out to me and dealt with it. And you'd have done the work because I'm the consumer. But when I'm doing all the work, why would I ever class that as great customer experience? What I class as great customer experience is when the organization that I'm paying the money to does the work for me. A little bit like you go to a couple of places overseas and you pull up for gas, petrol, diesel, whatever you want to call it, and they do it for you. It's a great experience. You have to get out of the car, you just turn your engine off, and you're more inclined to tip because they've come, they've filled your fuel, they've asked how much you want, you've not had to get out of your car, your hands aren't to get dirty and smell of fuel. It's a great service. In the UK, for example, that's very different. You got to do it all on your own, but you still pay the same price, or in some cases more, for that same gas, petrol, diesel. Which is the best experience? The best experience in reality is the one where I choose which I want. Do I want something to do it for me, or do I want to self-serve myself? Because maybe I'm an introvert and I don't speak to anybody or have any interactions. The best experiences out there, the ones that I get to choose, and the regulation is what guides you on how to manage it. And that's in my own personal world. That's how I determine what great customer experience is. And I don't think I'm alone in that viewpoint or that perspective.
No, no, because it's about what we value. It's about the value we put on our time as well as our effort, as well as our money as well. A really interesting case study there. So in terms of that, the sort of agentic AI wave that's coming through has been around for years and years, but has obviously had a very high profile the last couple of years. Why is it then, because it has been around for a while, why is it then that a lot of organizations are still hesitant about deploying AI in the right ways, or haven't quite got comfortable with how it could support their operations? Because in terms of compliance and automation, handling routine calls, that should be relatively straightforward, shouldn't it? Or are there a whole lot of other factors that are going on that are creating that kind of sense of hesitancy?
Well, I think that it has been around for a while. I think it's maturing, which I think is why it's getting more and more. You're hearing more and more noise about it. I think because a lot of these, there's competition now in the agentic world, but why are people hesitant? And it generally comes down to data. Like if you've got a clean set of data and you've got it in a data lake or a data warehouse, and you've got a central repository and your data's kept clean, and you've kept your core clean, I think turning that data into the outcomes, I think becomes much easier. Because if I give this example, people think of agentic as some robotic voice that you're speaking to that's very obvious not a real human being. And I think in the world we're on now, that's very much not the case. You can be having a conversation with a contact center agent tomorrow, and you'd have no clue whether that person's a real human being or not. And if that experience you get is the experience you expected and more, then who cares whether it's a real human or not a real human? To flip that round though, if you think of knowledge base, so let's just say I go onto a well-known website today and it says, "How can I help you?" on the bottom right of the screen. And I put, "Well, I'm actually looking for some laminate flooring." If my interactions back and forth start to challenge that website and that agentic flow in terms of it's now looking for information in its knowledge base that it doesn't have, it's going to break and stop working. And at some point, it's going to say, "I don't understand you. I can't help you. I quit. I'm out." And in most cases, what the end user end up doing is saying, "Can I speak to a real agent?" And you end up getting connected to somebody as a human, which in general, you have to queue or wait for, be put in a line, or you might have to do some more qualification questions. I think people that are hesitant to go down that route are doing it based on that specific problem there, that they've not yet got their data, they've not yet hit their hyperscaler in terms of what platform they're going to live on. And they've probably not yet got somebody who's supporting that organization, either in it or as a consultant, that's got the real experience of knowing how and when to deploy it, but also how to still ensure that you're keeping regulated or you're aligned to them regulations. And I think people are quite nervous around getting it wrong. Because we go back to that point of my mother-in-law in the airport and not good flying from that airport anymore. If a leading brand or a leading retailer or a leading contact center or network or utility provider gets that wrong, like that's not just losing one customer, you could be losing thousands of customers, which in the end result is losing millions of pounds of revenue. But from what I see, to answer the question in a simple way, it comes down to data. And if you've got clean data, you've got centralized systems, and you've got data ownership, organizations that are in that position today are the ones that are at the leading edge of technology when it comes to deploying agentic workforces.
Interesting. I think I absolutely agree about the data that kind of drives everything. I think the other area, the narrative that I'm seeing around customer experience as well as AI is not necessarily what it is or what it can do, but is now a much more mature conversation around how do we use it? What's the in terms of that change management transformation, if you will. So I think that side of things is an area that is a real focus for a lot of organizations, and it when you're kind of heading into the unknown, it feels like a big risk, and you can understand why people might want to take small steps. But I think that is part of the way forward, is to try these things, just just keep moving forward step by step, and look for the right data, look for the right ways to change, listen to the team as well as the customers, because I think particularly in the contact center world, those guys have so many stories and anecdotes that bring it all to life, that will help those people who need to understand it more, if you like. So I think there's that kind of change management piece about the different behaviors it will need, maybe the different mindset it may need, but yeah, again, it's easier said than done.
It is, and just on that, Jerry, I think this is sometimes where I think that narrative we've just talked around, I think in some respects is the problem itself. I didn't mind in the industry. I mean, I want to see companies stop buying AI, because AI is not like that. That's not the answer. The buying cycle needs to be around think about where AI should actually be used, as opposed to just buying it. And I think we need to move away from this cost arbitrage to outcome arbitrage, where AI may be the solution to the problem, but a human may be the solution to the problem. A new database or CRM or a BPO partner, like, simply they could be the solution to the problem. I think what we're seeing today in the market is people are trying to find where to deploy AI and where to use AI, and forgetting that actually, let's look at your customer journey and the process map of that journey. Let's start that journey with regulation and compliance. Let's finish that journey with what was the outcome for the customer. That then naturally leads you on to where to go, like what to put in the middle. Is that outbound interactions? Is it inbound interactions? Is it blended? Is it across multimedia? Is it voice? Is it email? Is it WhatsApp? And based on demographic, that changes. I know my grandma, who's in her late 80s, would rather you phoned her than send her a message. But I also know my daughter, who's 18, would rather you send her a message than phone her. And I think that's all things you got to take into account within the demographics of our society as well. And I think that if organizations that are trying to deliver the best service in the regulated industry started with that front and end in mind, I think the middle piece figures itself out on its own.
Yeah, and it would all work as it should.
Yes.
I think it's a really interesting point about the different personas having different requirements. But again, with a real understanding of each of those personas needs, those outbound calls could be automated. The emails could be automated. So I think there's a lot to go at. But I do get it that there's I understand the hesitation around deploying AI. Is it in the right area? What's going to change? Are we backing the right AI and that kind of stuff? Because you don't want to undo all the work that you've done, which I guess comes back full circle to the reasons why we use people like Simply Contact, because they have that kind of one step removed, objective view of the world. And I'm thinking in terms of time, maybe we should look at wrapping this up. But in terms of where do we go from here? What would we ask of contact centers, of Simply Contact, of organizations who are looking to go down this route or are halfway there, and kind of looking around with a long way down this road? Where do we go from here? And I think some of the things for me is, just recognize that compliance isn't the same as good compliance isn't the same as a good experience. It's your ticket into the game, but for the sake of your own team and that of the contact center, you need to have absolute clarity about how good you're going to be over and above that, which then means you're going to measure other things other than what's in the compliance checklist. You'll be measuring what's most important to that customer at that time. So it's having that measurement piece, that kind of holistic view. So yeah, the contact centers like Simply Contact would have all those guys would have the insight on what those issues are. They would know their way, how a customer sometimes has to navigate their way around a really clunky system. What are the shortcuts that people are taking? All that kind of stuff that could be automated within the world of, and still be compliant and just free up those resources to do more value added activities. But it's an interesting one for sure. So Daniel, what would your kind of closing thoughts be on these topics?
Yeah, so I think for me it's pretty simple. I think if a contact center manager, a dialer manager, a customer experience manager are listening to this podcast, I'd say automation is powerful, but it doesn't fix poor process. It doesn't fix poor governance, and it doesn't fix poor customer thinking. If anything, it exposes it faster just by automating it. I think the organizations that win won't be the ones that automate the most. They'll be the ones that combine the right technology, the right partners, and the right operating model to deliver better outcomes in a safe manner, and especially in regulated environments. And I think Rita started off the call by saying, you can't automate yourself out of a compliant crisis, which I think is the topic of the podcast, which you can, but you can design yourself out of one. And I think if the thought goes into that design process, the customer experience and the outcomes will improve.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that's so important, that point about the outcomes. What outcomes do we want? So really interesting conversation. Rita, I hope you found that interesting. Any sort of thoughts from yourself on that?
Yeah, sure. The idea that you can't automate your way out of a compliance problem, which you in fact can, as Daniel highlighted in the very end. It sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but clearly it's not obvious enough yet, given what's actually happening out there and given the examples that you shared today. Big thanks to Daniel and Jerry for being so open and direct about what you see. And thank you, the audience, for listening. If this conversation raised questions relevant to your operations, we're always happy to talk. Find us at Simply Contact. And thanks everyone for joining.